Elon's just trying to raise as much money as he can to build, to get there first. Let me tell you a little secret, Farzad. Elon can raise as much money as he wishes to raise.
And what's interesting about that conversation, right? Because if we tie it back to sort of where we started, which is Tesla investing in XAI, right? So we're walking through all these complexities of trying to get this thing done, right? It's not just like a code thing. It's not just like a training compute thing or an engineering thing. It's an energy thing. It's you're probably going to have to navigate through governments and regulation, right? And depending where you're throwing these things up, I'm assuming the requirements of this, is XAI going to be like a US only thing, or is it going to be a global thing? Is Elon going to be able to do XAI in China? Doubt it. Although they did approve FSD, right? So it's like there's a lot of different complexities that apply to this, and it's like, okay, cool. So given that the challenge is extremely difficult, but the payoff, especially for the first winner, and this is like the crazy thing about this, right? The first one that reaches the solution very likely would just win, right? Because if you reach AGI first, all of a sudden you have a flywheel that will begin and will never end. It will just keep going. And the second you hit that, it's like you go, hockey stick, and it's like, goodbye, everybody. So the first player that reaches that level wins first, right? So it's like everything's being staked for that first player to reach AGI and reaching the ability to not only solve it, but keep it running through all the energy needs, so on and so forth. So it's almost like Elon's trying to gather as much resources as humanly possible to be able to do that in any way, which way he can. And I'm wondering if that's really truly at the core of this Tesla investing in XAI thing. It's just like he just needs to be able to raise capital or to have access to capital in any which way, so that he wins, because he thinks that if he wins, everybody wins, because he doesn't trust anybody else. And we can debate if that's right or wrong, but
right, there are a lot of things to unstring there. A lot of things to unstring.
You're welcome.
Not one. But I do want to say that I don't think it's going to be the winner takes all here. I'm fairly certain it's not going to be winner takes all. And the reason I'm fairly certain is because I don't think there's one way to get to AGI, and I don't think there's one thing that is AGI. I mean, every one of us has AGI. There isn't one AGI, and there isn't going to be one type of AGI. There's going to be many, because if you think of AGI, you must think about very different specializations amongst different groups of people or different nations of people. You must think about different specializations within nations, and then different specializations between people. So there's enough space within this thing called AGI that there could be multiple winners. And generally in technology, the history has been there have been multiple winners. If we're talking about physics, in general, there's one theory of physics which is current and which is accepted, and it evolves over time very slowly. But when we're talking about general intelligence, there are 8-9 billion of us that each have a kind of unique general intelligence. So I think my personal view is there isn't going to be one AGI. Now, the second issue is Elon's just trying to raise as much money as he can to build, to get there first. Let me tell you a little secret, Farzad. Elon can raise as much money as he wishes to raise, with or without Tesla. I mean, he only has to say, I think I'll raise money, and there they just come. And I've experienced it. So this is just reality. Now, things could change, could turn on a dime. I mean, we could be running into a recession where suddenly money becomes king. And we've moved from a point where money has been worthless to now money has some value. money could become king again. I've lived in those days. And when we get to that point, maybe even Elon can't raise that amount of money. But I think at this point, Elon is considering Tesla's investment because there are some compelling arguments, and I've tried to make them earlier, for Tesla to invest in XAI.
So another parallel question to dive into here is, if we've got, OpenAI and their advancement towards this AGI goal, and then we've got Google and Gemini, and now we've got some other players in the Anthropics of the world, and you can go down a list. Meta's obviously got their hat in the ring in this area as well. How important is it for Elon to have an effort on this front in order to maintain the dynamic stability of this competitive landscape, and really to ultimately, hopefully, preserve a positive future for humanity as we make this next transition into, a world where the amount of artificial intelligence is slowly growing in proportion to the amount of human intelligence, and eventually will surpass the amount of human intelligence?
That's such a great question, Hans. I think it harks back to my earlier point about all generative AI is not alike, and that everyone has a different approach and a different direction. And I don't think there's going to be one winner. I think there's going to be a winner in a particular direction, in a particular domain. And I think there are going to be multiple winners in these multiple domains, and they don't necessarily fuse, and they don't necessarily link, and they sometimes compete, and sometimes they support each other. That would be my guess. Again, the LLM, the model itself, is not the end of the world. It's the beginning of the world. What you do with that model, and what that means is the applications or the functional capabilities that you build onto those models and help feed back into those models are going to be the key. I think that it is that's my view of the world, and that's the reason why Elon building Grok or XAI, and XAI building Grok is going to be important, because he is one of the greatest product managers that the world has ever seen. There's no doubt that of his many skills and capabilities, product management, putting into a box the ability to imagine a product that nobody's thought of before, but becomes absolutely, you can't live without it, and it's the greatest thing since life. That's the ultimate product manager, and I think he's the ultimate product manager. The other thing about his product management, which is brilliant, is that he always thinks about the value add and the cost. He is so cost conscious, it's extraordinary. And that comes from the wars that he's been in. And so having this level of product management, heading a company, doing, driving towards AGI is such a great boon. So if he hadn't have started the company, I would have wanted him to start the company because of that skill set.
He's a civilization accelerant.
Civilization accelerant. I mean, he's been called a lot of names, some of them not quite as good as that name.
Civilization destroyer.
I mean, he can't get out of his own way. He's a lovely guy. He's a wonderful guy, but he just can't get out of his own way.
Okay, let's hit Tesla China insurance real quick before we let you go. So for those that are not following the story, just yesterday, Tom Zhu was named the CEO, I believe is the official title of Tesla Insurance in China. And I think this is a much bigger deal than just, hey, look, insurance company in China. I think this has robotaxi implications. How how are you guys thinking about this? We'll start with Larry. Where's your head at with this?
Well, it's a very important move. I mean, it's a move that says, yep, we have to self-insure. Robotaxi is going to require self-insurance. It's going to require that they take risk and that they re-underwrite that risk with a broad swath of insurance companies, and that they take a certain amount of risk. I think that's true of robotaxi everywhere, and I think China's just being treated as another market, a normal market, not an abnormal market, the way General Motors worked and the way all the other foreign automakers worked. And so that makes a whole lot of sense. I think it's a great move. I think it's a very positive sign, very positive sign. So I think I think the robotaxi march in China is going to be as quick, as fast as it is in the United States.
Do you think it could actually go faster? And I'll give a little context into why I'm asking the question. One of the big reasons why I feel like we're in this era of stagnation that has created, I think, a lot of the turmoil that we feel at this point in time is because we have regulated ourselves out of the ability to innovate. And that really has set in here in the United States. And one of the points that Michael Dunn made to us when he appeared on the podcast a few weeks ago was that, there's a fundamental difference in the mission of the regulator in China with respect to objectives that the CCP views as strategic, which would be electric vehicles. It's going to be self-driving technology, that the regulator is there to come behind the companies and say, how can we make this move faster? How can we make sure that we achieve these objectives as quickly as possible, instead of what we have here in the West in general, especially if you look at an environment like Europe, but even also here in the United States, where the regulators are there to, okay, let's slow down. Let's maybe not do those things. Maybe let's allow whoever it is that doesn't want you to succeed because they stand to lose money to have too much of a say in whether or not you get to do this thing. With that backdrop and the fact that FSD is a strategically important objective for the CCP, does that potentially become the place where Tesla has basically the handcuffs off and they're allowed to move forward and do things that they would not be allowed to do in any other environment?
That's a brilliant observation. I'm aligned with what you said. I think there's every chance that they move faster in China, not just for that reason, but that reason is a very big component of why they could move faster. China's strange. China's got a much, much stronger regulatory power than the federal government has in the United States, but it uses it very, very judiciously. Here we use it very injudiciously. We hand power down to bureaucrats, and bureaucrats tend to accumulate that power and use it in a very divisive or very, I think, thoughtless way. In
Arbitrary.
China, in China, they, what they do is they say, what's best for China? The hell with the people, what's best for China, and do what's best for China. And they're very pragmatic about that. So it's good and it's bad. But to your point, I think they could well use China as the proof point for broad use of FSD. And that's it. And what are we going to do about it? Anyway, Hans, you're right. It's more than possible. This is the sign that we're moving towards FSD in China faster than we'll move here in the United States.
Yeah. And it is such a, I think that's another thing, like, to put in, Elon's cap, is that his ability to just work with the Chinese government, and I know people will say, I've read texts that's a bad thing because, you're empowering an adversary, all that stuff. But I think ultimately it's just impressive watching a guy being able to create those relationships with that government, and then watching our own government, the government of the country from which he's a citizen in, sometimes actively try to derail him for different reasons.
In all fairness, you have to remember that up to 2016, China was not seen as an adversary. China was seen as, entering the world into the stage of world cooperation. And two things occurred. The one is Xi accumulated power, and the other is Trump came to power. And so Trump saw the danger of China, verbalized it, and implemented very strong, boundaries on that power in U.S. trade. Now we all agree with it. But at the time that he implemented that policy, it was thought to be, the world is flat, everybody should trade with each other, blah, 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 blah. The fact that China wasn't following the regulations was kind of overlooked. Yeah, they'll be all right, it'll come along. But it never came along. And so now it's everybody is on board with that particular policy. So that was a big change. But up until that time, it was seen as a good thing. And Elon's work in China was seen that way, and he led the way. I mean, he really blazed a trail by sheer, brilliance, and became the first U.S. car maker to have ownership of their own plant and their own business in China. So he could be a force for, bridging the gaps that we have between us and China, because they are bridgeable. There's no reason we should be enemies, none at all.